Welcome to Women of Steel with me, Miriam Grace, the podcast where women who've had their mettle tested help us make important links for ourselves. What is the definition of a witch, and what does it have to do with therapy? I wanted to talk to Karen Shimwell, who has a long career in working with people with mental health and addiction issues, and discover why she calls herself a witch and what she means by craft. Today we discuss what this all means for her and for me as we age and as we face the cycles of birth and death. Karen, welcome to our podcast. Now, you call yourself a witch, and I wanted to ask about that. We work in similar lines of work, supporting people. We work in mental health. Tell me, what is a witch?
What gives me the audacity to call myself a witch? Increasing audacity as well. It's something that I thought a long time ago, and now no longer feel embarrassed about. I think it's easier if you call it witchcraft, because what that says then is that a craft is a skill, and it's skills that we acquire. And I think what we mean by witchcraft is the skills, particularly that some of us acquire, that help us help people and help us do things that are quite special in some ways and need a lot of practice to get right. So I think the idea of wise women and healers who are now people very often who are professionals, social workers, or more often nurses, I think, or doctors, or those kinds of traditional Western healers, can rightly also call themselves witches. You'll remember years ago I went to New Directions in the study of alcohol and committed the equivalent of professional suicide by standing up and giving a presentation to a large number of my peers in the alcohol field about just this. And the audience was of a lot of nurses and a lot of medical professionals and a lot of helping agents in the mid-90s. And I stood up and said, "Hello, I'm a witch." And I explained why. And I said that there were lots of things about counselling and helpful conversations that I think bear comparison with rituals and helpful witchy things that might happen. And I think there's a lot of things that we think of as being witchy that are actually just common sense or good counselling practice, certainly person-centred, certainly relying on language, communication, and focus on the other person.
Oh, okay. So, I work as a psychotherapist, and you work.
Witch, you're a witch.
Well, I'm thinking, with your definition, am I a witch? And I'm also wondering about predominantly, do you think witchcraft is predominantly owned by women?
Not necessarily, though. I think there's various takes on that nowadays, including ideas to do with gender and what is gender and what is sex and all the rest of it. So I'm kind of not so interested in saying it's just about women, but I think there are some particularly female attributes that are involved, things that we think of as typically female. And let's face it, the helping professions, the caring professions are very much dominated by women. And the image we have of witches from the past is almost entirely of women, often uglified, often maligned. We have those images of witches in the woods, living in their huts. Um, And I used to feel quite puzzled by that and afraid and a bit cross about those women. And now I totally get it, because if somebody wants to give me a cottage in the woods to go and live by myself with the woodland creatures, then I'd bite their hands off, frankly.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes,
I
me too.
think there's a reason those women were there, and that's
Mm.
because very often they were unmarried or without the protection of a man, or that they lived separately from a community that had failed them in some way.
Mm.
So I think solitude, exclusion, and yet also been a figure of kind of interest and mystery, somebody that you'd go and
Mm.
see for a potion or a
Yeah.
helpful conversation.
Yes, yes, but it's also a figure of fear, um,
Mm.
something that, often provoked hatred or, murder.
Yeah.
These women were often killed because they were different. They weren't part of the community.
Well, I think women were often killed, and with less frequency than they are now. But I
Mm,
think you didn't have to be a witch in the woods to get killed either. A lot of people talk about the burning times. There's some
mm,
very exciting American um, witchcraft groups online. They're very excited about the idea that people were burnt. People were burnt, and they were persecuted just for being ordinary men and women.
mm.
But again, a lot of women were involved, and it was a way of getting, it's more misogyny, really, I think, if you look at it. Though lots of men were also persecuted during those times, and a lot of it was about kind of religious persecution as well. Um, I think we need to be cautious about kind of thinking of it as only to do with women, because it's inaccurate. And I do like being accurate.
I know
I think
you
that's
do.
quite important. I think that's quite witchy, actually.
Yeah.
There's also two different kinds of ways of looking at this notion of witchcraft, and one is of a more Wiccan version of practice, which is one that people quite often know about. It's also the one that's kind of quite commodifiable. You can buy a lot of Wiccan things
Mm.
in little shops in Doncaster, and you can buy a lot of Wiccan things online. And if you want, you can get an entire costume to get dressed up in
Yes,
and be
why
Wiccan
not?
in.
Why
Yes,
not?
yes. But there's that version of it, which is fine if it takes a little bit of theatre to get you to a place of power. If it takes some objects, then we know about that, don't we? We know about using objects, we know about using things that help you focus, achieve different states of thinking, of mind, mindfulness, meditation, yoga. I think some of the practices contained within Wicca are not so different from other practices that help you focus and just achieve a different condition, a different state. The use of spells and ritual language. We know words are powerful. We know they have impact. It's actually something I struggle with. I'm not very good at spells and incantations. I feel daft, frankly, doing that stuff.
Mm.
But I know there's other methods of arriving at a place of power or a place of thoughtfulness that allows me to do things that are useful to me, useful to other people.
What are those other things? What if I was observing you and thinking, oh, Karen's being quite witchy today. What would I be observing? What would I be seeing? What is your craft?
Um, Attention, giving focus to things. Um, I think grounding oneself is essential to doing good work with people. Being present,
Hmm.
if you can. We learn this from multiple other strands of kind of thoughtful thinking. Um, I've always found meditative ritual acts to be helpful, and have referred to myself in the past as a kitchen witch. Now, kitchen witchery is not a mystery, really. It's, the production of food, it's the giving of food that represents love, it's the creation of harmonious connections and social events. That's to me, that's witchcraft. That's
Yeah,
something
yeah.
that we do, all of us, on a daily basis.
Mm,
We even include, witchy elements when we want to make it special. We light candles, don't we?
yeah.
And we make special smells around the home, or we make our homes ambient in order to
Mm,
create these kind of settings in which other things are going to happen. We set the stage, as it were. And I think those are witchy moments. I think if you saw me preparing for a professional helping conversation, what you're not seeing is the 35 years of practice that I bring to that, and the different kinds of training that I've had. When I am working at my best, what I know is that something happens that is more than the sum of the parts.
yes.
So I used to refer to something that I called the voice.
Mm,
And
mm,
it was a stage of a conversation with somebody where I would feel as though I was seeing and hearing things that were more than what was actually going on in the room, that I could get very strong feelings, transference we call it, or projection. I
yeah.
could get very strong feelings about what had happened to somebody and what they were trying to tell me, what they were trying to articulate, and make a connection. And that I could describe that or say things that had a powerful effect on people.
Mm.
Um, I have called it my making people cry voice as well, which I don't set out to do, but sometimes what you're doing is dealing with moments of very powerful and evocative emotion for people.
Absolutely. If
And the
someone
voice,
cries, yeah, if
the
someone
voice
cries,
appears.
mm,
It comes unbidden. And one of the things that I found interesting was that all of the kind of major therapists and counselling theorists and thinkers of the 20th century, a lot of them men, all arrived in their later years at a point where they got a bit spooky.
yeah,
So Jung,
mm,
um,
yeah,
and various others all talked in their later years in ways that seem quite bonkers, really, if
yeah,
you read their stuff. And
yeah, yeah.
Jung is particularly a favourite of mine, and he, of course, was the guy that had over the door it said, "Whether you want it or not, God's called. God is
Yes.
present."
God is present, and I see that as, the soul and so on. But I also think that, invited or not, the body is present. Invited or not, the soul is present. You know, all the things that we might not want to be present, sexuality and so on. All these things are there in the room, and I was just wanting to say, if our client cries or our client laughs, that's usually an indicator of something's hitting the spot, something's, that aha moment, as we call it in Gestalt.
I think it's, yeah, a moment of change or transformation or revelation, a peeling back of a layer, and you've assisted somebody with that by the use of, I was thinking about this morning, thinking and imagining our conversation. Micro skills. I mean, I try and teach micro skills to people, skills of attention, skills of listening. But I know some of it only comes through continuous effort and practice that, to understand when somebody's accessing a memory or reading something. I mean, I've talked in the past about kind of the skill of reading a room. So if we walk into a room and nobody is moving, nobody's doing anything, we're not really looking at people's faces, we will still be aware, for example, if that room full of people has just received bad news. We
Yes,
will know
yes.
that.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I know I agree with you. A lot of this is to do with decades of practice and attention and focusing in this way. But you sort of referred to something that is one of those moments when clients might say to you, or sometimes they say to me, they say, "Are you psychic?" Because we appear to know something that they haven't told us. And I also wonder whether some of that comes from our childhoods, our hypervigilance, and our trauma as well. What do you think?
Um, yes, absolutely. And I'm only just really starting to see some of that as superpowers, things that were acquired as survival or coping mechanisms that actually honed to a greater degree become, excellent strategies, things that I can commodify and which I've sold for 30 years. Um, my team call it my spidey sense. It's kind of like I've activated this extra level of kind of like, we're not going to go there, or that person's really upset, or we're not
Yeah.
going to do this thing, or we're going to approach it in this way.
Mm,
Um, and undoubtedly, it came from early experiences of reading adults and others around me in order to manage and cope with some quite difficult and traumatic situations in which adults were unpredictable and chaotic. It's not uncommon, I think, for nurses and helping professionals to have those kinds of early childhood experiences. They seem predictive,
yeah.
really,
Mm.
of those abilities and that interest in helping others as well. To me, it makes sense that if you're good at something, then you might try and make a career out of it.
Absolutely. But it brings us back to the witches in the woods, in their huts, that, very often maybe they've suffered something,
Mm.
um, and that's the reason that they're.
There's a reason they're ugly.
Mm,
There's a reason they're ugly, undoubtedly, which is that, poverty, hardship, trauma, difficulty, challenge doesn't make for beauty.
mm,
Um,
mm,
it, it is hardship that we see on the faces of those women. Um, but they're uglified to be vilified as well. I,
mm,
I kind of like those images now. I kind of enjoy those images of those
mm.
really horrible witches with big noses and warts and all the rest of it, because I kind of identify so much more than I did. And some of it is the effects also of menopause and old age.
Yes, yes.
Um, I did not realize until I became menopausal myself that so much of what I saw in older women was not something over which they had any control.
Mm,
I can remember looking and thinking, oh, I'd never let that happen to me. I have no choice. I
mm,
have no choice about the condition of my skin, my hair, my teeth. The loss of fertility has incredible impacts on women and makes us look a certain way.
mm,
We
mm,
look completely different in menopause than we did other parts of our lives. Um, I'm kind of into it. I'm learning to be into it. As you
mm,
know, I set up a group called Hera and her Wayward Daughters, which was precisely about the shock of the change that
mm.
was coming about, and the fact that I couldn't see representations of women of my age that I could relate to in any way. What you generally see are, oh, lovely kind of memes and, people in adverts and so on, older women, and they're all older women who happen to be ex-models or ex-dancers, and they're all, still fairly well put together and etiolated with silvery hair and fantastic cheekbones. And I was thinking,
They have
my
long,
face is going, yeah, my face is going south. Did have cheekbones, but I haven't got them anymore.
they have long,
So
straightened silver hair, don't they? And
yes,
like you
yeah,
said,
yeah,
the high cheekbones, and they move with grace, and if they are, of course, slim. It
yes.
doesn't seem as if the changing hormones has any impact on their ability to lose weight or
Yeah, yeah, all that.
retain
So
youth.
I got really cross, and I got so cross. This is often what propels me into something that's
Mm,
going to be important in my life. I got propelled into setting up a Facebook book where we share images of diverse aging women,
mm,
and I think we've got 406 members from across the globe now.
yes.
It's slowed down a bit in 4 years. Apparently, there are a limited number of helpful images of aging women, but there's still this, vast archive that we discovered was really helpful. Looking at images of women that look a bit more like you
Mm.
has positive mental effects. If we're continually being asked to look at images that our culture around us it tells us is more desirable or, better somehow. And we're not like that. We're not these
No. And
skinny
again,
people.
it
Then
isolates us, it sends us to the woods.
yeah,
When you say, I'm sort of getting into it, I'm sort of enjoying it made me think, well, maybe that is what makes you a witch, because, maybe what people didn't like about the witches is, you know, they're looking like that and they don't seem to care.
yeah,
They seem to be sort of okay with aging, with being on their own, with not presenting as pretty. This is a
yeah.
strong theme in
Yeah,
the therapy
it's even
session.
controversial. I saw something the other day where younger women premenopausal women, were justifying why they didn't wear makeup, and having to say things about why they didn't wear makeup or present in such a way, made up and so on. I think that, that pressure to behave and appear in a certain way is profound.
Mm, mm.
It's not it's not help. I suppose I used to enjoy getting dressed up and putting makeup on now. I absolutely don't want to do that anymore. I mean, I don't want to make people recoil, and I'd like to be attractive both to myself, my friends, and my partner. But I'm certainly I also don't want to look like that anymore.
Yeah.
Um, I approach my 60th. I'm 60 in February. And one of the things I've decided is that I'm going to have what's known as a crone crowning. Is this something you've heard of?
I have heard of this. Yes, yes.
I'm going to be crowned. I'm going to be self-crowned as a crone. It's been an interesting decision to come to because I was just gonna, have a Chinese takeaway. But now I'm going to have a ceremony outdoors in the woods and
Well, I
be
hope that
crown,
you'll
be
invite
crone
me along.
crowned.
I hope you'll invite me along. Are we going to get naked, or is February not
No,
the
no, no,
time?
absolutely no nudity whatsoever. It's February,
Oh,
Miriam.
yeah, yeah.
So we will
Well, but I think
robes. You could wear some of the dressing up
you did get naked in the woods, Karen, I think, didn't you?
sometimes.
No, but
I have done.
were you involved in that photo project?
Oh yes,
You
yeah, yeah,
do
with
that. You
Charlotte
took your
Armitage.
you took your
Yes.
kit off in the woods. Tell us a bit about that.
That was a project during COVID when it was lockdown and people were very isolated. And Charlotte Armitage, who is a member of Hera and her Wayward Daughters, the group that I've been speaking about, conceived of this photo project of taking pictures of people naked in an outdoor setting, which was all that was kind of possible with you know, the um, the lockdown rules, such as they were. So we all went off to Surprise View out in Derbyshire. There were about 30 women there in the
Mm,
end, and she contacted a lot of them through
mm,
my group.
mm,
We all arrived and took our kit off and were photographed naked, and some of the photos appeared in an exhibition. It was actually very challenging for a lot of us.
mm,
I wasn't at all happy with some of the images that were produced.
mm,
It's very hard confronting
mm.
yourself in that way. I don't think that's what Charlotte intended either. I think she saw more more about the images being to do with connection to nature,
Mm.
um, and this sense also of isolation. But
Yeah.
I did come home proud that day. It was a beautiful day. It was incredibly hot. And there were a lot of climbers, male climbers, that suddenly appeared and started climbing. So they had a good view of us all as we took our clothes off. Charlotte comes from a dance background, so she was very into this idea that you would have your kimono on, cover up, and then,
Mm.
reveal ready for your photo. And a few of us, myself included, kind of got fed up with the revealing. I just wanted to be naked
Yeah.
outdoors.
Yeah.
And that was actually really liberating. And to be with friends and women of my age and
Mm.
be naked was a wonderful thing. I think that there's some virtue in that. You've got me thinking now. I'm thinking, oh, should we do a bit more of that? Should we do a bit more of body acceptance stuff and getting naked in the woods?
Well, I suppose, some of the work, that I'm doing with women coming out later in life is part of, re-examining this deep conditioning that we need to be pretty and that we need to be this way and that we need to be that way, and it's such an overlap. So I'm working with a few people on. I used Mary Oliver's quote from Wild Geese: "You do not need to be good. You do not, have
Yeah.
to walk on your knees for 1,000 miles." I might be misquoting there, but and we're sort of working through. You do not need to be pretty. You do not need to be young. You do not need to be slim, so, or is it you do not have to be? But anyway, my point is that, we in midlife we get this opportunity to just think, I don't, you know, I don't know where I even, how I even ended up going along with that. And this is a time to, go through some
I
expo.
think it's really interesting how women, I think when you see women kind of own being a lesbian and come out as a lesbian, I can see it in younger friends as well who are lesbians. The style changes dramatically. Very often, these rather girly teenagers then in their 20s become much more androgynous young women, incredibly beautiful,
Mm,
in another way. I'm thinking of a couple of friends of mine,
yeah.
and one of them, Alicia, we just say she needs to do a calendar. She dresses up in ways that are just absolutely astonishing, and then poses in all sorts of settings in this very interesting and funny way that kind of subverts all the expectations that you have of these otherwise feminine ideals of beauty. And I think
Versions, versions.
Nellie's a bit like that as well. Our mutual friend, the photographer Nellie Naylor, who, if you look back, was, a more conventionally presenting young woman and is now this expertly tailored
Mm,
older woman with this presentation. And you see it with older lesbians, I think, and later in life lesbians as well, that part of the satisfaction must be to make those changes. And the whole ritual of how you appear in public is kind of interesting, I think, in that regard.
the
I certainly,
evolution
so
bit.
long as I'm covered up and I'm not going to spook the horses, that's the but I'm still fond of kind of beautiful things, jewelry and matching things and
Yes,
nice colours and clothes, and there's an artistry to all that I think is beyond
yes,
gender anyway, and that
yeah.
it's just an appreciation of being nicely covered up. So that's what I aim for now, nicely covered up. Um,
Mm,
but yeah, I love the way that I see women change and grow and,
yeah,
and kind of
yeah.
become more themselves. I think had we had the choice or felt we had the choice when we were younger, you and I would have presented differently, perhaps.
I think we
Um,
we did our best within the limitations that we had, because we went as hippie and as bohemian as we could within the culture that we lived in. We didn't go naked, I have to say. But what a shame, because gosh, we'd have been gorgeous. Well, we still are, but
wasted.
I
I
know.
went naked a few times. Yeah, not often enough, really, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah.
And yeah, far too much concern. There was somebody the other day saying that young women should absolutely be banned from engaging with young men, in any way, shape, or form until they're 25. And I kind of thought, yeah, I can go with that.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
that apart from anything else, the young men aren't suitable until they're that age anyway.
But they're not really men, are they? They're boys.
They're
Let's face
not
it.
cooked.
But, yeah.
That's what I always say. They're not cooked yet.
No, no. But coming back to, I'm really sort of hooked on this word subversion now because, again, it comes back to this whole thing of, when you said about you don't want to scare the horses, and I thought that, this myth that witches used to turn the milk sour, it's that, they're so subversive. They look wrong. They've not got the right look, and they're the wrong age, and they're not on the arm of a man, or under his wing, or his dominance, or whatever. And thinking of this, power. Perhaps we'll talk about this after the break, but I'm also thinking about the women in our families, the women behind us, and some of the, really unique rituals that you engage in terms of your family and the women in your family. We might go on to talk about that after the break. But yeah, I like the idea of Hera and her wayward daughters, the subversive elements of being who we are. And perhaps it's amazing, isn't it? We managed to get on to, the topic of let's get naked in February. And and the sense of just being authentically who we are, not airbrushed. And, is there a form of coming out for all women in midlife,
Yes.
straight
I
or
think I
gay?
think
Yeah.
I think you've hit something so powerful there, which is that you don't need to be a lesbian to come out as a woman. And there is
Yeah.
a point at which I think all women ideally achieve this sense of power of
Mm,
being themselves. If you want to call it being a witch or whatever it is that helps you get there. As I said, we arrive at these positions with tools that are helpful to us. I see it happen to a lot of women when they start outdoor swimming as well, that
mm,
they become really connected to nature. One of the things with Hera was that we came across a sister group, which is the Crone Club run by Justine Corbett. And we went along to a workshop like, we're here, we've come to meet you. Who are you lot? And we discovered that they had looked at exactly the same images as us
yeah.
and that they had found exactly the same commonalities that we'd found.
Mm, mm,
Loads of swimmers, loads of outdoor swimmers in my group, loads of outdoor swimmers in their group, loads of interest in images of women, loads of interest in deities, female deities and goddesses in particular. Slight
mm,
hint of witchcraft in both.
mm,
Um, and this idea that what you need as you age is connection to nature, outdoor connection to nature, immersion in water, to
mm,
contemplate this idea of women as powerful entities, deities, goddesses, even. I now conceive of my ancestors and the women of my line going back into history in a way that I didn't before, and I think of them as, a very kindly and beneficent
mm,
internal voice, almost like, we see you, we see you, we see you doing so well. We are so proud of you, our daughter. You
mm,
know, that
mm,
that would be something it's very easily imagined. And if I reach back, and I know my grandmother's saying that. I know her they're rooting for me. These women are absolutely rooting for me. You've got a bathroom, you've got indoor plumbing, this is kind of like their pride. And it doesn't take so very much then to travel back in time a few hundred years, a few hundred more, the women of the 16th or the 15th, I can travel, I can time travel and go back and connect then with the thought that, there's thousands of women there And how much further do I have to go back before they're actual kind of deities or goddesses? Is that how it works? I don't know. Obviously I
Yeah,
don't know. This is an
yeah.
imaginative story that I'm telling myself, which is, I think, also part of witchcraft, the ability to imagine, tell stories. But, I've created that picture for you of the line of women going back. You felt that. You saw
Mm,
some of what I was saying.
I,
Um,
I
a spell
do.
by any other name.
Well, I would love for us to continue after the break to talk a little bit more about the family, the women, the rituals, and the things that are passed down to us, whether it's recipes or dressmaking scissors or whatever it is. So let's take a break now, and we'll come back and talk a little bit more about the craft of a witch.
Are you coming out later in life? Are you partnered with someone who is? The Women with Women conference has you covered. Meet like-minded people and hear from authors, therapists and specialists at a beautiful venue in Sheffield. The first Women with Women conference is set for June 2025, and with limited spaces, tickets are available at womenofsteel.co.uk. We'll see you there. This event is not open to men or straight people.
Welcome back, Karen. We were talking about you being a witch before the break, and you said something about witchcraft, and you were talking about it's more the doing and the living, and you were also beginning to talk about something that almost made me shiver. It was gorgeous, about our ancestors and the women behind us being there. And we're talking about women who've passed on, women who've died, but their real presence. And I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about the women in your family, and also about a ritual that I know that you take part in every single year. Well, would you call it a almost like a religious festival for you? It is round the solstice after all.
Yes, yeah, the well dressings. So there's a
Mm,
tradition of well dressings in Derbyshire. Not everybody's heard about it, even in Derbyshire, which always puzzles me. It obviously consumes me for
mm,
at least a week every year. It has pagan roots. It was Christianized. It's probably been something that's been done since Victorian times, and was perhaps a tradition that was imaginatively resurrected by Victorians. Pictures are made in clay using petals. Clay boards the size of double beds are covered with these images and erected to stand over water sources in villages across Derbyshire. Sounds absolutely bizarre, doesn't it? But it is a very beautiful thing to do, and it takes a long time, and there is a lot of skill and a lot of tradition involved in the making of these, very ephemeral community co-produced pieces of art. My family and others in the village that I come from, Mulgrave, have done a well for as as long as the tradition's been around, I think, which,
mm,
as I say, dates back to Victorian times. So it was more often men
mhm,
that did it. In the beginning, it would have been kind of quite frivolous, perhaps, for women to leave the home and do it. Now it's more often women, but there is pretty equal mix. And in my family, there's a particular well that we do, the fountain well, which is, of course, the best well
mhm.
in the village,
Yes.
and the one that is traditionally more pagan in its themes. So the festival is Christianized, but that's quite nice. It's all right. People choose religious subjects, religious imagery, more so in the past, less so now. Often they choose contemporary themes now. As I say, ours is very often pagan and refers to more natural kind of images and connection to nature. And it's all done to be completed on the Friday night nearest to the solstice. And the boards are put up in the morning, very, very early, by my cousin Fred on his flatbed truck. And then much later in the day, the vicar and the village band turn up, and there's a procession through the village, and it's not at all like the Wicker Man. And each well, there's five of them, are individually blessed by the vicar. We've got a lady vicar, she's very nice, and songs are sung. And then we all go off for tea and cake in the village hall. And I can think of no better way to spend an entire week in the heat of summer than being in a shed. They're called sheds. They're not. They were sheds originally and must have been barns before that. But now it's everybody's double garages. And the
Yeah.
double garages are liberated of the Bentleys and the BMWs. And we plonk the boards in there on trestle tables and make these pictures. And it's a work again of meditation. It requires such concentration and effort. And I love the atmosphere that grows in this working space when people are gathered together, working on this kind of collective enterprise with a shared goal and working together beautifully. And, you get very quiet moments in the shed where people are kind of sharing this working time, this reflective time together, and, conversation and gossip and all the things that go with people being together. It's absolutely wonderful. I cannot imagine a summer without doing it.
Mm,
It's my lifetime ambition to be allowed to design a well. That will be down to my family in the end, I think.
yeah, yeah.
Because they've said I'm not committed enough. Um, and we have some beautiful designers. Where Janine Strange does the designs at the moment, and they're gorgeous. They're drifts of flowers and water, and it's all expressed with petals. And you start off with the harder materials, the things that will last the week
Yeah,
and last the elements. And we put moss in and harder materials like that to begin with. And the very last thing to go in is buttercups, which is the most painstaking work you can imagine. And it's like putting gold leaf on something. And
wow.
if you do it right and don't squash them too much so that they bruise and weaken, it does come out glimmering like gold. I
Oh,
wish I
it's
could show you some
beautiful.
pictures now.
Well, I
This is what
mean,
I did last year.
yes, well, people really do need to, go and see these well dressings if they're anywhere near Derbyshire, or make the trip. I've been going since I was a little girl. My parents used to take me, and I've taken my children, and I still love to go to see the well dressings. And like you say, sometimes there's a religious quote, and that too will be done in, something from the Bible will be done in petals and so on. And I love sort of looking to see what's that? Is that peppercorns? Sometimes they use peppercorns. Have you used peppercorns in your pictures ever?
Oh, we're quite conservative. There's lots of rules about the use of materials, and
Mm,
they should only be natural materials and not dyed petals. And
yeah,
we tut furiously when other materials are used. Wool is used to outline the shapes, so you know what you're going to
yeah,
be hoping without the wool.
yeah,
But you can't suddenly start sticking found objects or plastics into it. It's
yeah.
got to be
Mm,
this kind of carefully conserved set of materials. And what's interesting as well is that they have to be preserved and kept and prepared year on year. So things have to be found and dried and kept and stored. And what we're trying to do is archive and collate this kind of set of materials and this body of knowledge about how these materials are to be stored and kept and what they can be used for and what effects you can achieve. So again, that's the work of women that I know in the village who are kind of putting this archive together. I was able to contribute to that because I inherited some of the oldest photographs I think we've got of Wells in the early part of the last century, very often with my granddad stood in front of him.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, the village is concerned with its history. It's not just your grave, we must say, that do
Mm.
the well dressings, but your graves are the best.
Okay, I believe you, and I'm sure our listeners will too. So we began talking about being a witch. We spoke about craft. We spoke about the interlinking of our therapeutic skills, our counselling, our words, and we're talking about honouring our ancestors in a way, and them supporting us. There's an element that you and I have spoken about before, which is of death
Mm.
in our conversations about this, and I think, we'll probably need a whole episode on its own to talk in great detail about death and death doulaing and all of those things. But tell me, how do you see this? I suppose it's from birth to death, isn't it? This practice. How does it fit with death?
Because I think women own death, really. I think death is often represented as a male character.
Mm,
Um, a bit hard to tell, perhaps, if he's just a skeleton, but all the traditional modern representations are of death as a man and not as a woman. And I actually think the big secret is that death is a woman,
mm-hmm.
that you are born from a woman, and that death comes to you as a woman. So many people, when they're dying, see women, don't they? They see their female relatives coming for them. My father did. He saw my grandmother, and he was the most practical and scientific man you could ever imagine. And he turned to me and said, "I can't believe it. Your granny's here in the room with us." And he was, really horrified, actually, to be having this, experience that he couldn't explain scientifically or justify in any way. It's just kind of like, she's here. Oh, okay. You know, I think women naturally, I mean, I'm going to say lots of things that people object to here, but I think women own death because we deal with life, because we deal with the little death, because we deal with blood and guts and gore and pain and, the care of children, their little losses, their little deaths, because we're meant to, it's kind of in the DNA. I'm not saying other people can't do that and can't acquire those experiences. I'm talking in broad brushstrokes, not ideologies. And I think one of the things I've come to realize is that I feel much more ready to contemplate death, not my own particularly, but the reality of death and what it means to people. And I'm learning a lot about it. As you know, I want to be a death doula potentially at the end of my professional career. And it sounds creepy, but I quite enjoy talking to people about death and what it means. And I think that we avoid or ignore it, particularly in this culture, in a way that they don't always in other cultures. Though, there are all sorts of ways in which people deal with death. But I think the idea of the ancestors being present and of death being as important and significant, and something also that we're ready for in more ways than we realise. I think if death comes to us unexpectedly or painfully through some terrible illness or accident, then of course it's dreadful. Yes, I think it's interesting that we so often think of death as a male character, and it's often represented, particularly in modern times, as a skeleton, but a skeleton that's very definitely got male characteristics, is a male archetype. Whereas actually, I think it makes much more sense to think of death as a woman. We are birthed and we are deathed. And I think death comes to us. Did I say about my dad seeing? Is that
Oh, yes. Yeah. Because your
so?
dad
Yeah,
women.
my dad, who was a very rigorously scientific man, degree in economics, and nothing kind of spooky that he believed in. Particularly, he was an atheist and a fan of Richard Dawkins. And as he was dying in the days before his death, he saw my granny, his
Mhm,
mother, come
mhm,
to him. And people often do see, particularly female, not always female, but particularly female relatives come to them as part of the process of them dying. Dying is the process. So
mhm.
my father turned to me. He was properly shocked, really horrified. Your granny's here. I can see you, granny. I'm not happy about this. Because of course it kind of was very counterintuitive to him, and
Yeah.
I don't think he minded actually. I think he was kind of interested that he was having this experience, and seeing and smelling things at the end that he knew weren't there, but were comforting things to see. And I think the more I read about death, the more I think about death, the more I learn about death, the more I understand that if we are dying naturally,
Mm,
then death is a process, and we know how to do it. Our bodies know how to die in much the same way as we know how to be born.
mm,
Um,
mm,
And that's not to say it's not without struggle or difficulty or impact on us or those around us, but that it is a natural process and something that our body prepares for. Things shut down in a certain order, people become quiet or active in a certain way, hear or see things that are helpful to them. The distress, the fear lessens. Lots
yes.
of chemicals are kind of arrive to help us in the
Mm,
same way as chemicals arrive to help us through other big life events and life processes. So I just think that's absolutely fascinating. And of course, death by accident, violent death, unexpected death, death with some horrible, painful modern illness is
mm.
not experienced in quite the same way.
No, no,
And
that's
it's a
that's not
shock.
part
It's a
of the.
shock to us
Yeah,
all.
yeah.
But I think this business of kind of dying of old age is ideal, really. I would wish that for everybody, and to be at the end aware that, of a life long lived, and to be connected in some way to both the world to come, whatever that might be. It could just be a great big nothing, and the world that we're leaving behind. And I've had that experience at the with people dying. I've been present when several people have died,
Mm.
and I think there is something otherworldly
Yes, yes.
happens. And
Mm,
I say this as my father's daughter, with a good degree and a bit of science behind me as well, that
yeah,
I'm open to that. And again, that's part of the witchery, I think, that I think there is nothing more unexplainable, mysterious, and magical than, our very existence. One has only to look up at the sky to kind of think, well, that's a bit of a bugger, isn't it?
yes,
Whoa, that's
yeah,
big.
yeah.
So, having accepted that I am this very little thing in this vast, 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 unimaginably large universe, I think I can begin to accept some other things that I also can't explain, like death
Death
and where we go and what
and
happens and
birth.
what that might involve.
But I mean, when I'm just thinking that, I wasn't in I was in quite a agnostic place, let's say, when I gave birth the first time, and looking into my daughter's eyes, it was really apparent that this wasn't some sort of organic thing, her father's DNA and mine. And, it's like there was a person in there, and it's like, where have you come from? That's completely bizarre. And then,
Yeah,
and then now, with my dad, where have you gone? How could you be here and not be here? And it seems beyond our capability to understand. And yet, today, you and I have been talking about midlife, aging, becoming crones and hags and so on. And I'm doing this circle with my hand, which of course listeners won't be able to hear, see, but the cycles of life. And I do think that women experience quite obvious cycles through their lives, these cycles of life of and loss and letting go, and letting go of our fertility, very often letting go of maybe fertilized babies. All of these things we're always practicing for
I
the
mean, we're
end.
talking archetypes, and the male experience, the physical male experience is characteristically different. There's no third stage in that sense.
Mm,
There's only the arrival at manhood,
mm,
if they make it,
mm,
and then aging.
mm,
Whereas in the business of having a female body and being a woman, we talk about three stages:
mm,
maid, mother, and crone.
mm,
And in my understanding, it doesn't mean you are literally a mother, that you literally must give birth, but that there is
mm.
a stage of your life that's got some kind of functionality to do with those qualities of
Yeah.
nurture or mothering or whatever it is, however you play that out. Some people have suggested that what we need is four stages, which is maid, mother, queen, and crone. And
Mm,
I felt that way at, at a point where I was not very excited about becoming a crone.
mm.
And now I just think, to hell with it. I
Oh,
don't want to be a
pro.
queen. That's fine. I'll go directly to crone,
Um,
hence the crowning.
yeah.
And as I say, I'm very much looking forward to it. I think a lot of people are fearful of words like crone or hag to
Mm,
describe aging women. I'm very much in the business of reclaiming those.
me
I
too.
think cronehood brings with it blessings that we do
Mm,
not know otherwise.
mm, mm,
The business of owning your anger, the business of not caring about some
mm.
things that were formerly so important, so stupidly important. It's a
Yeah.
blessing to let go of them. It really is. And to arrive at a point where you can own, your experience and own your wisdom, and not be apologetic about that anymore. If we think of all those apologetic, disempowering
Yes.
words that
Yes.
women use, can I just, I'm so sorry, all the mitigations we offer for the things that we say. I read now that women that start to lose their mitigations and
Yeah.
softeners
Yeah.
are seen as aggressive, for example. You're speaking in exactly the same way that anybody else might, but suddenly without all your softening clauses and phrases,
Yeah.
you're seeing people say to me, "You're very direct, aren't you? Gosh, you're so assertive." And I think I'm not. I'm actually not. I'm not half assertive enough. I'm not half direct enough. It's taken me years to even arrive at this point
Yeah.
of clarity about what I say. But I no longer use those softeners. In fact, when I write emails at work, I have to remember to wrap it up a bit. And I often draft something, stick a nice bit on the beginning, stick
Yeah.
a nicer bit on the end, and then send it because I
Yeah.
know otherwise it will not go down as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
we can play with that language, we can use those words powerfully. We're back to spells again, aren't we?
Mm.
And just having that micro touch that kind of thinks, well, I'm in the know about this now.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can use this really.
Yeah. So if you could choose to be 16 or 60 in February, which would you choose?
60,
Mm.
unreservedly. I would not want to go back to that poor poor girl. Oh,
Oh, I know.
oh,
I know.
oh, she
Oh,
was, yeah. Oh, sort
yeah.
yourself out, love. Um, I, I, I actually think very kindly towards her now, much more ever than I have done before, and I know much more about what she was going through and why it was so painful.
Mm.
Um, And I look back as well with pleasure. I met some of my nicest friends at that point in my life,
Mm-hmm.
and had a very, very functional and happy time, probably through my 20s. But 60's good. 60's all right, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
Um,
I wonder,
I'm doing things now with a sense of identity and purpose that I've never had before.
yes.
Um, it would be nice to be, you know, a bit thinner and a bit fitter while I was doing it all.
Mm,
Um,
mm. Yeah, yeah,
you know,
yeah.
I'm more accepting of all of it really, and that's kind of an interesting place
Mm,
um, to
mm,
be.
mm.
Acceptance. I think Kubler-Ross, you know,
Yes,
if
yes,
I'm approaching my life with the cycles of grief, then you
yeah.
know I've arrived at acceptance.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I feel, I feel a sort of a tenderness for the girls that we were once, and
Mm.
real pride in the women that we are. And I think that we might be coming out the other side of that really horrible menopausal bit, It's like
Yeah,
maybe
yeah, I think
we're
so.
starting
I
to
think
see the
so.
light at the other end.
I'm remembering when I first met you in the prefab at Tapton School. I think you invited me to a
Sheffield.
prayer meeting.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, there the witchcraft begins.
I
Um,
think that now I am not half as bothered about Christianity as I used to be, um, or any religion really.
mm.
Judeo-Christian religions particularly. I used to think I'd explode if I went into a church, but um, I find I get on rather well with vicars. I always used to get on with their sons.
Well, we'll save that bit for another for another episode, Karen. And I think starting to talk about death, and feeling comfortable with it is one of the blessings really that I've experienced in the last few years.
Yeah,
And I feel, I don't feel afraid of death for myself. I don't want to lose people, but
yeah.
it's different as I face my own aging and loss.
Can't wait.
Yeah, you can't wait. I'm
Can't
not.
wait. Oh, no, I can wait. I hope for a lot more life before my death. But
Mm,
it is just as interesting as any other
yeah,
thing that I've approached, you
yeah,
know.
yeah,
You know, why should we be more fearful of
yeah.
this than any other part of this great big adventure?
Yeah. So, well, let's get together again soon on this podcast, and maybe talk about some of our experiences with, people dying, and if anybody's interested in listening, we will make an episode of that. And just want to thank you so much for your words and your just bringing some depth and soothing to the whole midlife process. So thank you so much for being with us today. And yeah, it was lovely to meet you as a witch and to learn that I'm probably one too.
You you are.
We'll end with a cackle then. So, would you call yourself a witch? And would you prefer to be 16 or 60? What magic spells do you think you use in your life to create atmosphere, ambience, mood changes? As always, we'd love to hear from you at Women of Steel.
Thank you for listening to Women of Steel, created and hosted by me, Miriam Grace, psychotherapist at Blue Skies. If you'd like to know more about my work as a therapist and writer, you can follow me on social media. Please take a look at the show notes for information and contact details. And in the meantime, be kind to yourself.